I remember you telling me one thing was when the Iranian government referred to the Azerbaijanians as cockroaches. That sounds so familiar with the people out there during the Holocaust. The Germans and Austrians presented themselves as being from the super race, and anyone who wasn't from what they deemed their super race was considered below them. So it's basically is that. When you raise those words, my mind went back to that. And also here in Canada, we have to remember how the First Nations were treated in the residential schools, how they weren't allowed to speak their language, how they had, needles put in their tongues to basically to stop them speaking their languages. A bunch of atrocities were done to them. It was just, horrific what happened to the First Nations. Now, what happens is in 2006, you were telling me in 2006 that something happened over in Iran in regards to the Azerbaijanians that shows that this is still existing within our times. Could you tell the listening audience what happened in 2006 and basically also what happened to the Azerbaijanians when they were put in the prison system in regards to the treatment that they received?
Yes, you mentioned Aryans. One of the problems we have in Iran that according to the history that they are teaching within schools, even in this Islamic regime, that they are teaching people that Persians and some other minorities are Aryans, and Turks and Arabs they are not from Aryan race. So being an Aryan is taught still in the society. There are many Iranians, they are very proud of being Aryan, and then you can even find in the community some kids are naming are named after being called Arya, or things that in Europe and Canada would be very disturbing to hear about the Aryan race, but it is even the Islamic regime is sometimes using, like former President Khatami said that he's very proud that he is not an Arab, even though he is, according to his ancestors, he is a Sayyid. So Sayyid means a descendant of Prophet Muhammad, and Prophet Muhammad was an Arab. So you mentioned about that in Germany, and now the same thing is playing out for the last 80 years in Iran, and automatically Azerbaijani Turks are not. They have tried to tell Azerbaijanis that you are Aryan, and I personally, many times I have heard from some Iranians telling me that you are an Aryan as much as we are, and I have found that very disturbing. So what happened in 2006 with having this mentality, it came to that, and for many years they have called Azerbaijani Turks donkeys and humiliating names. And in May 2006, they state-run newspaper, which is tightly controlled by the government. Nothing gets through. Somehow they had an Azerbaijani cockroach speaking in Azerbaijani with a Persian kid that was trying to speak to the cockroach, and cockroach couldn't understand because it was an Azerbaijani. So, and then they had, that was not enough. Following that cartoon, they had 10 ways of exterminating cockroaches. So it is, and when I read that, you could see that they are putting some stereotypes that exist within that society against Azerbaijanis. You could see that they fed it into those 10 ways of, some of them were very disturbing ways of exterminating cockroaches. That was like the title was that. So, and then following that, Azerbaijanis came out in hundreds of thousands in Tabriz and Urmia, Zanjan, and they demonstrated, and government's reaction was very harsh. You see now that in the international media what is happening in Tehran. but it was very severe. Many people were shot dead. So many injured were taken to prison. And then later on they dragged out well-known Azerbaijani activists from their homes. They shot at the demonstrators with this riot gun that sprays bullets, and that blinded some. Which one of these. Blinded individual. He's in Switzerland seeking asylum. His name is Vahid Davarpana. Many people were killed. I had at that time, I started 3 years ago, I couldn't keep up with list of them injured and arrested. We had thousands of people. According to some records, they say probably there were 10,000 people arrested. So it was a very tough situation for us to face. And on the other hand, we were facing some members of the Iranian community outside trying to connect this to separatism, and they were blocking us, and we were getting we were attacked both by the government and by some individuals outside. You could see that, and we were not organized enough. We have enough to get this word out to the international media, and Azerbaijani demonstrated for days. They were killed, they were blinded, and the world did not hear about it. You said about school. I went to school in Iran. I started my first year of school. I remember that it was one of the hardest day of my life, because I entered the school, and my parents, but I was lucky, I had support of my parents very much. So my parents came with me. I remember thinking that why they think this is a big deal and I need support going to school. But I was not taught Persian at home. My parents believed that we should learn our language first. And when I entered the school, I felt it's like this, that you speak English in Vancouver, and suddenly when you enter school, you suddenly see that they are teaching totally a language that you don't hear in the society. At that time, for me, that was like it was like that. Now some parents are starting to speak their kids in Persian, which is another problem. The kid is between two languages, and sometimes I can see that they never learn either of them. So I entered the school, and I was told, my parents, they asked the principal to allow me to sometimes speak in my language, but I quickly figured out that they are not going to let. It was against the law at that time. Not the education system was set like that you were not allowed to speak anything but Persian, and students before me, like 5-6 years before me, they were even fined for speaking my language. What I did, I cried and refused to go to school for some time, and finally I gave up. So that, and students were fined for speaking their language. Still, if anyone, we had a 15-year-old Mohammad Reza Avaspur who wrote on the wall that my mother tongue would not die, and they arrested that kid and they suspended him from his feet in the Ministry of Intelligence. They have this called Italat. They have had many kids removed from teenagers for just asking to be educated in their language. And now even in kindergartens, they teach kids that if you speak your language at home, little bird gonna report to the teacher.